Today we're catching some sun and waves with Sar, a QHS member whose life is as vibrant and refreshing as a seaside breeze. What currents brought her to the sunny shores of the quantum shift? Let's surf behind the scenes to see the waves she's been riding.
My name is Sar, and this is my backstory. And I don't really think I've had all that interesting of a life, but anyway, we'll see how it goes. See if you like it. My dad's family was from Ireland, Scotland, and Wales. And his dad was a veterinarian, and his mother was a school teacher. And my mother's family was from Germany and Denmark, and her father was a carpenter, and her mother was a homemaker. My dad graduated valedictorian from high school and went on to trade school to become an electrician. My mother attended Juilliard School of Music in New York, majoring in piano and voice, and she could sing literally anything. And when I would come home from school from a glee club or something with chorus, my mother could pick that sheet music up and sing it, which was so amazing to me as a child. She could play anything on the piano. And at one time, I don't even know what we were doing or how it happened, but somebody had set a glass partially full of water on one of those big radiators. And my mother held a note and walked that glass like that all the way off the radiator. And we kids thought that was awesome, you know? We wanted her to do it again, at which time she promptly told us that she was not a circus performer. So we would not be looking for that. But she could sing anything. And she had such a broad range. I think she could sing a couple octaves, which was pretty amazing. But because my mother's life had been so focused around performing music and things like that, she was never taught any of the life skills like the rest of us learn, like cooking and cleaning and sewing and things like that. And so she made up her mind that none of her children were going to be in a situation that she found herself in. So my brothers all had to learn how to cook and clean and sew, and we girls had to learn how to change a flat tire and change oil in our car and work a power tool and shoot a gun. And so my mother was like, everybody needs to know how to do everything. And I'm grateful that that was her position, because I'm not stupid about anything. I may not know all of it, but it'd be difficult to hoodwink me on some things, because my mother made sure that all of us were exposed to different things. My mother was an only child, and my father, by the time he turned 16, he had become an only child. His brother and sister had passed away. So I absolutely had no cousins, and I had no aunts or uncles. And the aunts and uncles that I did have in my life, they were my great aunts and uncles. And when I was a kid, they were in their 80s. So I was surrounded by all these old people and, you know, just us kids in the family. I was born in the 1950s, and I was born in an elevator during a power failure. So if you can imagine that, my poor mother. And she was locked in there between floors for several hours by herself. After my birth, it was discovered that my mother had blood clots in both of her legs. So I was discharged home to my dad, and my mother had to stay in the hospital for multiple weeks. So my father's parents lived close by, and his mother came to look after all of us. I was number 4 by that time. And my 2 brothers were in school. My sister and I were, obviously I was an infant. She wasn't in school yet. So my grandmother came and looked after us. In the evening, she took me back home to her house with her husband, and I stayed there and came back in the morning. Well, the result of that was that after 6 weeks went by, my mother finally came home. I had bonded to my grandmother. And my father said that I cried inconsolably if my grandmother was either not holding me or present in the room. So, you know, my parents were good parents. I was baby number 4. It's not like they didn't know what to do or how to care for me. But I had made it clear that I wanted to be with my grandmother. So they made a difficult decision, and they shared me, if you will, between my grandparents' house and between them. And I think that was a very painful place for them. But I was happy as a clam. So I think, you know, mom and dad loved me enough. You know, they were willing to do it. And I stayed back and forth between the 2 homes until I became a teenager. And then I actually went to live with my grandmother full time. I was a very serious and studious child and quiet. And my grandmother's home was conducive to that. I was the only one there. My grandfather died when I was 6. And my parents' house was extremely chaotic with all the children. There were 5 kids there, and I guess all the stuff that went on. I was a lot happier at my grandmother's house. Because my grandfather was a veterinarian, none of us ever went to the doctors till he passed away. He compounded his own medications. My brother broke his arm. He set his arm. So I was unaccustomed to vaccinations and going to a traditional medicine until I had entered school, because my grandfather was alive until then. I started wearing glasses in 4th grade, and I didn't even know I needed them. Nobody knew I needed them, but I got in trouble in school for constantly talking, which was really not who I was as a child. And so my parents came to school, my grandmother, to find out what was going on. And then they finally asked me, and I said, well, I couldn't read the board. And the gal in front of me was reading it for me all day long. And so then I went to the eye doctors, and I don't know how my parents afforded, or my grandmother. I literally had my lenses changed to my glasses probably every 2 or 3 months for years. And I don't know how they ever paid for it. That had to have been a real burden on them. I wanted to become a nurse. That's one of the things I wanted to do. And I knew that there wouldn't be enough money to pay for it, and I was going to have to save up my own money. So when I was 12, I started working full time. I worked 20 hours on the weekends and 4 hours every day after school during the week. I worked those same amount of hours throughout the summer. Even when school was out, I helped a family who lived not too far from us that had a tobacco farm, and I helped on the tobacco farm during the day. I was able to skip a grade in school, and so I turned 16 my freshman year in college. I continued to work those 40 hours, take 18-hour credit, and I had a 4.0 and was on the dean's list. I was a pretty smart kid. All of us were smart, and I didn't even know I was smart. That was just things came easy to me. And so I had to learn as I grew older to have temperance and patience for people that things didn't come easily to, because I didn't understand why. Why couldn't they get it the first time they heard it or they saw it? Where for me, I had it and I was ready to go on to the next thing. So I had to learn as I matured to, give people a break. Not everybody was going to get it like that. One of the nurses I worked with, her mother-in-law rented a room, and she liked to rent it to state troopers. She was an elderly lady and felt, that was a safety for her. And they wanted me to meet this guy. And that was the first and only blind date I had ever been on. That was 50 years ago. And we've been married 47 years. And we have a really terrific son. So the benefit of going to university early was that I was privileged to have 2 separate and very distinct careers in my life. And I was able to pursue lots of other avenues that, were of interest to me. I've written a couple of books. I've traveled to Africa. We've built orphanages and schools in Africa and India. And now that I'm older, I've been able to watch some of those young people whose children are now grown, entering college or having families of their own. It's been pretty exciting to watch. It wasn't until I started thinking about this prequel and what I wanted to include in it that I realized what a blessed life I've had, as far as both of the households I lived in were egalitarian. Nobody ever said I couldn't do something because I was a girl, or I should do this or shouldn't do that. That was never ever brought up. The sky was the limit. And anything I was interested in pursuing academically or musically or anything else, my parents or my grandmother saw to it that I could do it or had an opportunity to try it. And that was the same thing for all the kids. My parents, they never told us no. If it had been something ridiculous, maybe, that I don't know that anybody asked that. But to learn a musical instrument, to dance, to be a majorette, to, I remember, the only thing I can remember my father saying no to was my sister and my brother both had been ballet. And my brother was exceedingly good at it. And they wanted them to perform the Nutcracker in Russia. And my father said no on that. He was terrified for my brother and sister to leave the country. And, there was a lot of consternation about that in the house. But that's the only thing I ever remember my parents saying no to. Anything that we wanted to pursue, they supported it. And like I said, through the years, I wondered financially how they ever pulled it all off. Because there were 5 kids and we all were interested in something. 14 years ago, we bought a house in the Caribbean, and 10 years ago, we moved here full time. And I realized that was probably one of the better decisions I'd made in life. It gave us an opportunity to grow spiritually and to grow as just people. We were no longer, what we did was no longer our identity, but we were free then to just find out who we were and what we liked. And I'm starting to actually like the person I am now. I don't know that I did before, but I'm starting to like myself because I'm really starting to come in touch with my soul and who I really am. So in regards to QHS, I'm going to just blow through some of the stuff on the illnesses so you can kind of see it hasn't always been a breeze for me. Throughout my life, I've had a lot of stuff happen to me, a lot of illnesses and diseases and different things. And as I share this with you, I'm not owning that. These aren't my diseases. They aren't my anything. They are things that happened to me as I went through life. I did have a C-section with my son, and it was one of those, anything that could go wrong went wrong. And I was in the hospital in ICU, and then in several weeks before he and I both came home. I had not only amalgam fillings in my mouth, but they had actually constructed teeth for me using that. And when I was in my 20s, I started having neurotoxicity from all the heavy metals from the amalgam fillings that I had, and the mercury and all that. And I had to have all that taken out. And even to this day, I only have 8 teeth that are not crowns and bridges. The 4 here and the 4 there, the rest of my mouth is all crowns and bridges. And not because I didn't take care of my teeth. I had poor dental care. Not that Mom and Dad didn't take us to the dentist, but he was not an accomplished dentist. So I ended up with suffering from all of that. I had what was called tibial torsion, which means the lower part of my leg went one direction against my femur when I walked. So it put a lot of stress on my knees and helped to wear my joints down. I was diagnosed with osteoarthritis, the joints really rugged. They ate the meniscus actually in my knees because they were so rough. Lyme's disease, that I had that for many, many years, probably maybe still have some of those things running around, but boy, did they really make me sick for a lot of years. Degenerative disc disease. I had a crushing injury to my lower leg. I had several hundred pounds of wood pellets fall on me from several pallets, and then they ended up falling on my chest and arms. And my husband, who'd had open heart surgery and was supposed to be resting, had to come out in the garage and start unloading the pellets off my chest so I could breathe and help me to get up. That was an interesting time. I had varicose vein surgery on both my legs. I had a condition called leaky gut. And I had gluten intolerance, and both of those things led to chronic and systemic inflammation in my body. I had a car accident. A woman ran a stop sign, hit me broadside, caused me to have what's called thoracic outlet syndrome. I ended up having to have my first rib resected, and then my shoulder reconstructed. I had breast cancer, and that resulted in a total mastectomy. I refused the chemo, radiation, and additional surgery they wanted me to have. The insurance company wanted to assign me an oncology navigator who they wanted me to sign my medical power of attorney over to, and I refused to do that. So the insurance company said they weren't going to pay for my mastectomy if I didn't go see a psychiatrist, at which point I had to get a lawyer and write a letter, and that took care of that. So a lot of strange things like that. I chose alternative medication and medicine for the cancer treatments. And the OBGYN doctor I had sent me to someone who did naturopathic medicine. She sent me to somebody else. Ended up, I had 5 or 6 different docs I went through, and they came back to me and said, you have a huge parasitic infection. Some of it's Lyme, some of it's other things. And all cancer comes from parasitic infections. And so for 3 years, they treated those parasites aggressively. And I will tell you, that was not a fun time. And it was horribly expensive, and it was all out of pocket. But eventually, I got well. I got rid of it and I got well. I had fallen down the stairs a couple of times and had torn the meniscus in both of my knees and had to have the meniscus removed in both knees at different times. And that also resulted in bone on bone in my joints. And they, the only thing they could offer me was, okay, let's do total knees. I wasn't interested in that either. So I researched and I found a place in Georgia that did stem cell therapy. So I flew to Georgia and had stem cells put in both of my knees. That was 7 years ago. It certainly has extended the length of time and the quality of my life with my knees. I developed something called an epiretinal membrane on my left eye, which causes my retina to be distorted, and it makes my vision like I'm looking through a lace curtain. That and partial cataracts and floaters have resulted in my vision being somewhat diminished. I have had elevated blood pressure throughout my life, not really high, maybe 135 or 138 over 88, but it was extended over a number of years. And when my husband was ill, the doc said to me, your blood pressure is really, really high. You really need to get on some medication. I had always been negative about that, but I took the medicine. I felt particularly sick. And I thought, well, I'll give it one more shot. I took it the next day, ended up in the hospital. It shot my blood pressure. Instead of lowering it, it made me like 225 over 110. And I was tacking at 165. And I was having seizures. And they were trying to flush the medication out of my body with IV fluids. I was in the hospital for 5 days. I had every kind of test you can imagine with dying, otherwise trying to figure out the root cause of the high blood pressure and of why I had such a reaction to the medication. Nobody could figure it out. They tried one other medication and had a totally different mechanism of action. I had the exact same results. And when they came on with the third medicine, I told them to get lost, that I was not going to do this again. And they put that on my medical record. I said I wasn't going to do it again. That's okay. But one of the things that has happened out of is the V6 and the V9 have dealt with the blood pressure. I don't have a blood pressure issue now, so I'm pretty excited about that. And all of these things, you just keep going through life. You do the best you can. But in 2020, my husband had one stroke, and in 2021, 8 months later, he had a pretty big stroke, which left him partially paralyzed on his right side and in a wheelchair. He's still wheelchair bound. And that absolutely flipped our lives upside down. We were swimming all the time and running our ATVs and on our jet ski and hiking and just really enjoying our lives here. And we went from that to living in the hospital, physical therapy, rehab, you name it. And then he started losing the blood flow to his legs. He had multiple surgeries with that. So I would have to say, since the last 4.5 years have been a living hell as far as his medical condition. And, when you're married, it becomes yours too. And so I've been a full-time caregiver for 4.5 years, and I haven't minded it. I love him dearly, and I'm grateful to have him alive. But we both want a different quality of life than we've currently been experiencing. So the bottom line is I've looked my whole life for out of the medical box solutions to the different conditions and illnesses and things that I've suffered and my family suffered. I've tried lots of alternative modalities. Some worked temporarily, and a lot of them didn't work at all. And I found QHS through Alex Collier. I want to say to you personally, Alex Collier, thank you from my heart. You have impacted my life and my family's life for good and for blessing. I'll never forget you. And one of these days, I hope I'll get a chance to meet you and tell you that in person, because you really have done a lot for me. And I know I'm not the only person today who could stand here and say that for you. When Alex took those little V6s out of his pockets and told us about QHS, I immediately went online during your webinar and looked, and of course the membership was closed. So I typed right in and I told you the membership's closed, and you were like, no way, and it was. So I just want to tell you that I went on several times a week until that membership opened, and then I signed up. So in October 2023, we became members of QHS, and in April of 2024, we received our V6. My husband and I both received tremendous healing from the V6, and my husband testified to that. One leg, he'd had a fem-pop bypass with graft, and his leg at the best was 80% after all the intervention. His right leg was at 60%, and when we went to the doctors in October of this year, he was 100% on the bypass leg, and he was 80% on the right leg, and the doctor didn't know what to say. And we didn't say anything because we didn't know whether the technology should be out there in the know yet. Now that the touch is out, I feel free, we can say things. We're wearing our V9, we're using the touch technology. And I just want to say what miraculous technologies those are. My inflammation's gone. I have more energy, and literally I am pain-free. So what do I want to see? I want to see this technology in the world. I want to see it unhindered available to the world. And my husband and I are ready to do whatever it takes to see that is able to be accomplished. I'm looking for many more years of my life, of a regenerated life, with the wisdom I currently have from all the hard knocks from all these things in life. And I would like to travel. I mean, there's things I want to see. I'd like to see the pyramids in Egypt. There's just a lot of stuff in this beautiful planet I'd like to see. So in closing, I just want to say thank you, QHS. I want to say thank you, Dr. A, with all the things you went through, that you didn't give up and you kept on with your dream and what you knew could be accomplished. Cynthia, for believing in Dr. A and the sacrifices you've gone through, and Tracy and Dr. G, and just everybody who's worked behind the scenes to see to it that we are where we are and that QHS is moving forward. So I thank you, and that's all I have to say.
Join us on the Prequel, where every story matters and every voice is heard. Because here at QHS, we're all about healing, learning, and growing together.